this self-study session on working with moral injury-based spiritual impasse. I'm Rebecca Parker. I'll be your guide for this session. As we work together today, there will be moments when I ask you to pause the video so that you can do some reflective writing. If you don't have a paper and a pencil or something to write with, pause the video now and collect your journal or a notebook and a good writing instrument, and then we'll continue. What is spiritual impasse? The concept was first defined by Constance Fitzgerald. She writes about it this way. By impasse, I mean that there is no way out, no way around, no rational escape from what imprisons one, no possibilities in the situation. In a true impasse, every normal manner of acting is brought to a standstill, and ironically, impasse is experienced not only in the problem itself, but also in any solution attempted. Every logical solution remains unsatisfying at the very least. The whole life situation suffers a depletion, has the word limits written upon it. In today's session, I will unfold for you some of what a spiritual impasse means, how spiritual impasse can occur, how spiritual impasse is often a component of moral injury, and offer you some tools for how people can move through a spiritual impasse, either you yourself or those you may be working with. Move through it in a way that will increase freedom, wholeness, integration, and the possibilities of sustainability and joy in your life, in our lives. As part of this teaching session, I will tell you some stories that will enable you to reflect on what spiritual impasse is and how it can be, and sometimes is, significantly transformed in a way that opens life up in new and wonderful ways. So to begin, a spiritual impasse results when a critical life experience comes into conflict with core beliefs or established values that guide a person's life. These may be ethical beliefs, they may be beliefs about the self, they may be deeply held values or perspectives on the world. But the impasse happens when those deeply held beliefs are not adequate for what life has given you to deal with. And you find that in order to grapple with your life experience, your beliefs begin to break down or cause you to be completely stuck. To explore this yourself deeply, first it is useful to try to identify some of the core beliefs that guide your life. So this is the first moment, in a moment, that I'm going to ask you to pause the video and complete some reflection sentences, some writing prompts. A core belief can take the form of an if-then statement. If I work really hard, then I will be rewarded. That can be a core belief. If I am good enough, I will be loved. If I want to be a faithful Christian, I will never think about myself and only care about others. Those are if-then statements. So make a note to take some time to write some completions of how you might hold to some if-then beliefs. Let's pause here for a few moments while you do that. If-then. These are just for your own reflection. You don't have to share them with anyone. Just take some time. If, then, pause there and write. Now, returning from your writing on that question, another way core beliefs happen is with statements about yourself, things you deeply believe about yourself. These can be negative, positive, or neutral beliefs, but they guide and shape how you experience the world. Examples: I believe I am a child of God and worthy of respect and love. Or, I don't believe I can ever succeed at anything. I always am a failure. Or, I am powerless. Or, another example, I can meet any challenge. I can do anything I set my mind to do. So now take some time with this writing prompt. Just complete in as many ways as are true for you for a few moments of writing. I am. Fill in that blank. Pause the video while you do some writing on that. And now as you return from that prompt, core beliefs can also be about how you feel the world works. Core beliefs about the world itself. And examples again can be things like, I believe everything happens for a reason. Or, I believe the world is a completely random place. Or, I believe the world is guided by a benevolent spirit that I call God. Whatever those things are that you believe about the way the world works also shapes your core experience of life. So do a little writing about that now. How would you say the world works? What do you believe about how the world works? Pause the video and do some writing on that. Now, returning to the reflections with me, a spiritual impasse occurs, I said, when a life crisis comes for which your core beliefs somehow are not adequate. They just don't work for the situation. Let me tell you a story from my own life in which I first began to understand what a spiritual impasse is. When I was a very young minister, a knock came on my office door one day, and when I opened it, a woman stood there whose eyes were sad, though she smiled, and she introduced herself. I'm Lucia, she said. I live down the street. I don't go to your church, but I saw your sign that you were a woman priest, and I thought maybe because you are a woman, you can understand my problem and help me. So I invited her in, and after Lucia had settled herself, she said, the problem is my husband. Mostly he's a good man, but sometimes he hits me. One time he broke my arm. I had to go to the hospital. I didn't want to tell them how I got hurt. I went to my priest 20 years ago, and he told me that I should rejoice in my sufferings, and that if I loved my husband, I should accept the pain of this suffering as Jesus accepted the cross because he loved us. I've been trying to follow the priest's advice now for 20 years, but my husband is starting to go after the children, and And I want to know, is what the priest told me true? In the moment that Lucia asked me that question, I felt like my mouth was stuffed with cotton. I couldn't answer for a few moments because though I didn't believe that Jesus suffering on the cross saved us all from sin, I was a liberal Christian, and the doctrine of the atoning sacrifice of Christ was really not part of my tradition. But I did believe, and had just preached that last Sunday, that Jesus shows us the highest form of love, which is a willingness to care about others no matter what it costs the self. That love never thinks about the well-being of oneself or any suffering or stress to oneself, but only thinks about the well-being of the other and what the other wants or needs. And so love is willing to suffer and never break relationship, no matter what it costs. I had just preached that on Sunday. And I realized if I was going to answer Lucia's question the way I felt it should be answered, I was going to have to rethink my core beliefs, my theology. And so I was stuck for a moment. But then I found my voice and I said to Lucia, no, God does not want you to be beaten by your husband. God does not want you to be crucified like this. God wants you to have your life and for your children to have their lives and for you to be protected and safe. When I said this, Lucia smiled a big smile and she said, I knew I was right, but it helps me to hear you say so. Beginning with that moment, Lucia made a plan to change her life, and I accompanied her as she went back to school to get a skill that enabled her to earn a sufficient living to care for herself and her children. And then she separated from her abusive husband. Eventually, he got help for his way of expressing his anger and frustrations through violence. And Lucia said, I got my life back and my children got their father back. In this story, the spiritual impasse for Lucia was that her faith tradition that was important to her and the teachings of her priest that she believed she should follow kept her stuck in a situation where she was being battered. And in order for something new to happen in her life, she had to come to a new belief, one that was more adequate for her situation. And she came to it in conversation with me, with another person. And then she was able to move forward in a new way, putting her life together in a different way, making choices, exercising her authority and her agency to shape her life and her children's lives in a better way. But while she was stuck in the spiritual impasse, her life reflected some of the kinds of impacts that a spiritual impasse can have on a life. One is that it can lead to an intensification of suffering, a stuckness in a place of suffering or pain, and a sense of even of abandonment or isolation in that pain. This experience of human beings is a very ancient one. It's happened to people in all times and places. We see it reflected in passages in the Bible where, for example, we read in Psalm 22 the words of outcry from a suffering soul, a cry to God, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it even has the words, am I a human being that I should suffer so? So a sense of unrelieved suffering can happen. Another thing that can happen is that one can experience a crisis in one's faith. One can be trying hard to hold on to one's faith, but one can be wondering, as Lucia did, is this really true? And while that is happening, a sense of meaning in life can crumble, and you can find yourself as if you were in free fall or moving around in circles and circles without ever moving forward, with a sense of meaninglessness. These impacts are similar to what happens with moral injury, which you have been studying and learning about. A moral injury occurs when one witnesses or participates in an event that deeply contradicts one's held moral beliefs or one's inherent moral conscience. And when that happens, there can be a kind of war within the person in which one's experience and one's beliefs are so at odds with one another that you are profoundly stuck or breakdown. You can be consumed with guilt and bitterness and confusion. Here are some words from an anonymous soldier speaking about his experience in war. I'm going to read to you. War work and the fog of war, it's as scary as it gets. What I saw and did, I have blood on my hands. I have a duffel bag full of sad, miserable, fantastical, and American hero stories. People that vaporized in front of my eyes. I don't want anyone to experience a downward spiral like I did, hearing about my story. So this is another impact of moral injury also has a spiritual impasse quality to it. And the impact is isolation. A person can find they want to hide the depth of their pain and their interior war within, feeling that it will harm others to even know what we are experiencing. It was a big step for Lucia to come tell me her story, to break her silence, to take a step out of her isolation. These impacts of bitterness and guilt, of isolation, of stuckness, weigh our lives down and can even lead us to ask questions such as, do I deserve to exist? Do I have a right to exist? So I'd like to invite you now to pause the video again. And as you think about your life experience, write about a time when you had an experience that brought you to a place and may still be bringing you now to a place where you feel like you're up against a brick wall. You don't know how to go on. You are stuck. You are at an impasse. And consider a couple questions as you write. What happened that brought you to this place? What emotions did you feel or are you feeling? What questions do you find yourself asking? So pause and write about an experience when you felt or are feeling stuck at an impasse. Take as much time as you'd like. And now when you come back from writing about that time when you felt you were at an impasse or witnessed someone else's impasse, let me tell you what I learned from the pastoral theologian Rosemary Knichi about options human beings have when they are at a spiritual impasse. Professor Kenichi says you have three choices at an impasse: one that has come from a moral injury and you're fighting with yourself, or another life crisis that your beliefs have not enabled you to move through. She says you have three choices. She sees people making three choices. One choice is you can hold on to your beliefs and minimize the painful or difficult experience. You can even deny the experience so that you do not have to question or let go of your beliefs. That's one option. The second option is you can abandon your beliefs completely, but embrace your experience and let it define your life going forward. And a third option is to become a theologian. And by this, what Professor Kenichi means is you can take on the task of creatively engaging with what you have believed and what you have experienced in such a way as to rework your beliefs, even transform them, and come to new beliefs that respond adequately to your experience and allow you to process your experience, not just be defined by your experience, so that you integrate the experience into a transformed life story that opens your life up in ways that offer you new choices, new decisions, greater integration, wholeness, and freedom. So let me share with you another story that illustrates this kind of transformation, beginning with a very deep impasse that lasted for a long time, but that then was transformed. And I'm going to read you this story, which is recorded in the book Proverbs of Ashes. This is a book that Dr. Rita Nakashima Brock and I wrote many years ago, in which we tell many stories of trauma and crisis in our lives and in the lives of people we have worked with that have led us to understand and be engaged with moral injury, moral suffering, and spiritual transformation. This is one story, a true story from my experience. Bill asked me to come see him. He'd been diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumor. "I want you to hear my testimony before I die," he'd said on the phone. Bill was Marge's husband. They lived out of town in a small house, shaded by trees close to the edge of the lake. There was quietness there, and I felt the warmth of their home when I settled in by the fire. Marge disappeared into some other part of the house. We all knew that the brain tumor was far advanced, but Bill could still talk cogently. "I'm not afraid to die," Bill began. "I want you to know that, and I want you to hear why. I was in the Korean War. They made me a sergeant and gave me a group of men to command. They were good guys. I loved them. Everyone, especially Sam, my best buddy. He was sweet and honest. He never said a hurtful word. He was always there when you needed him. We made it through some tough spots in that jungle, but the men were getting tired, run down with sickness, the heat. One day a message came through from my commanding officer ordering us to make an ambush the next day. I knew where we were in the jungle. I knew where the enemy was. I knew if we made the ambush, there was no chance that we could succeed at the objective or get out alive. It was a suicide mission. I argued with the commanding officer. I told him the mission would fail and that it was a stupid idea to send us in there. I went so far as to tell him that even if he gave the order, I would refuse to lead my men into there. He told me I was betraying my duty as a soldier, that I was letting personal feelings get in the way of my responsibility, that if I wasn't going to carry out the command, I wasn't an American, I wasn't a soldier, I wasn't a man. I felt ashamed of myself for questioning. The next day, I gave the order. We went in. It was bad. Bill stopped speaking for a moment, composing himself. Most of my men were killed. Bill hunched over and wrapped his arms around himself. I was holding Sam in my arms when he died. It was quiet for a moment. I broke down then. I wasn't good for anything anymore. They sent me home. In my eyes, I had failed in every way. I had questioned my superior officer. I had faltered in doing my duty, and when my men were killed, I couldn't take the pain. I began to drink. I wanted the shame to go away. I wanted to bury the pain. I drank for the next 20 years. My family fell apart. My wife and children were disappointed in me, angry, hurt. She took them and left. I drank more. Slowly but surely, I was killing myself. Then I met Marge. Bill sat up, caught my eye, and smiled. Marge was tough. She told me I was worth something, but I was treating myself like shit. She knew. She'd been there. Thanks to Marge's love, I got into AA. I stopped drinking. I began to feel all the things I'd buried and think all the things I couldn't bear to think. It was rough, but the other guys in AA listened to all the crap I had to say about myself, about the world. They just listened. Didn't tell me I was right. Didn't tell me I was wrong. Didn't blink. Then I really came to my senses, like the Bible said. I saw the truth. Back there in Korea, I was right to have questioned my commanding officer. I was right to feel the order should be disobeyed. And when I broke down because my buddies died, I was right to cry. As Bill spoke, he placed both hands on his own chest. "This is my manhood," he said, tapping a rhythm with his hands upon his body. "That I can feel, that I can care, that I can grieve, that I can love, that I hate war, that I have the courage to question, that I was willing not to obey. I'm not afraid to die now because I know what love is. I know where God is." Hands again pressing against his own flesh. "This is what I wanted you to hear from me before I die." He took my young hands in his old ones and looked me in the eye. "It's important for you to know this. You are a preacher. Tell my story. People need to know what I'm telling you. You need to know what I'm telling you." Bill had hated himself, but his life had been saved by a listening community, the tough encouragement of his wife, and by something in himself that rebelled against the suppression of his capacity to think and feel and act. This story illustrates many things about spiritual impasse and its transformation. The life crisis for Bill was a traumatic and tragic experience he witnessed and was part of in war. We have difficult experiences like this in other high-stakes situations. Nurses and doctors can have difficult experiences where what they must do and what they believe and value are in so much conflict. Police officers, and in our ordinary lives, in our families, or in our workplaces, we can have an experience that just breaks our heart, and our core beliefs can keep us in the place of brokenness. For Bill, those core beliefs were that a real man doesn't cry, a good soldier obeys orders, God expects us to sacrifice ourselves for the sake of others. And because he believed these things, he could no longer believe he was a good person. And he just wanted to shut down, close down, anesthetize himself. Drugs and alcohol helped him stay stuck. But the transformation came when someone invited him to think differently about himself, to change that core belief that he was worthless, not worth, not deserving to live, and to consider that he had a right to the tree of life, as the old African American spiritual says. And then he got connected to a community in which it was possible for him to tell the truth about his experience and his pain without judgment, in a space of openness and deep, compassionate listening. And there, listening to his own voice and receiving the gift of compassionate listening, he was able to find within himself deeper beliefs, new beliefs that allowed him to process that life-freezing experience in a new way that opened him up to a much deeper sense of the meaning of life and of who he was and of who God was. And he came to believe that he was worthy of love, that God was within his own flesh. And he died in peace, passing his witness on to others. Bill's story helped me begin to transform my core beliefs into a more life-giving perspective, a more life-sustaining way of being. So this is how spiritual impasse is transformed. By breaking the silence of the experience, by listening more deeply to one's own heart, by coming to new affirmations about what one most deeply believes is true, letting go of beliefs that hinder the integration of your experience, and forming beliefs, new perspectives that open you up, as Bill was opened up to a greater sense of love, as Lucia was opened up to new possibilities for her life, as you can be opened up beyond whatever stuck places may be binding you in an impasse. So as we conclude this session, I invite you to one final reflection exercise. I'll leave you with this writing prompt. I used to believe blank, but now I believe. Write how you would fill in those blanks. I used to believe, but now I believe. Blessings on your journey. Thank you for participating with this session.